welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at some really significant strategic shifts happening right now in the world of diabetes technology.
Yeah, big moves.
We're focusing on two major players, Medtronic and Ypsomed.
That's right. These companies have both made big announcements recently about, well, essentially reorganizing or divesting their diabetes divisions.
It's a move that speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the current pressures and, the future direction of the industry.
Absolutely. And our source material for this deep dive is it's a fantastic blog post. It pulls together insights from a conversation exploring exactly why these moves are happening now.
Gives us a great lens to understand the complexity here, right?
Totally. Think of it as a shortcut, sort of, to understanding the forces reshaping diabetes care.
Right.
Everything from competition to these disruptive new therapies.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the underlying reasons behind these strategic decisions, look at the financial picture, and try to figure out what these changes could mean for the future of diabetes technology, and maybe most importantly for you if you're someone living with diabetes or, caring for someone who is.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So let's start with Medtronic. I mean, this is a massive global leader in medical devices, right?
Yeah.
And they've announced plans to spin off their diabetes business. Now, what's particularly interesting is their stated preference. They want this new entity to become a publicly traded company through an IPO.
Now, on the surface, that might seem surprising. I mean, we know this diabetes division generates substantial revenue.
Right.
The analysis we read put it around $2.8 billion annually.
Right.
And it's even seen recent double-digit growth, so you might think, why get rid of a growing business?
And here's where it gets, well, really interesting, because the reality behind those numbers is it's more complicated. Even with the revenue growth, this division just wasn't performing well on profitability. It was actually missing its internal profit targets within the larger Medtronic structure.
That classic big company challenge. The blog post highlights that Medtronic's overall corporate focus is increasingly shifting. They're looking at areas with much higher profit margins, like, cardiovascular devices, surgical robotics, neurovascular tech.
Exactly. High margin stuff.
Which puts pressure on any business unit that isn't delivering similar profitability, even if the top-line revenue looks good.
Precisely. So the decision to spin off now, as the analysis details, it seems driven by several strategic goals for Medtronic itself. One is pretty clear: margin optimization. Separating a lower margin business helps improve Medtronic's overall financial profile. Simple as that.
Makes sense. And then for the diabetes business itself, this creates operational agility.
Yeah.
Or at least the potential for it.
Right. A standalone company can likely restructure, adapt much faster to, evolving consumer demands, the speed of digital health trends, much faster than it could under the weight of a huge parent organization.
There's also the benefit of market clarity. Taking it public, it allows investors to value the diabetes unit independently, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That could potentially unlock value that was maybe hidden or just averaged out within the diversified Medtronic valuation.
Plus, it offers strategic flexibility for Medtronic. They reduce their direct exposure to a segment that, let's be honest, is facing some serious challenges.
Big challenges from competitors, and those pharmaceutical therapies we'll definitely get into.
Yeah.
So the core insight here from the analysis is that this isn't just about Medtronic cutting ties or shedding risk. It's really a strategic decision to reconfigure the diabetes business, give it a better shot at long-term competitiveness in what's become a rapidly changing market.
So what does this all mean for the business itself and that competitive landscape it faces?
Well, a big part of that challenge is the intense competition. The analysis points out that Medtronic's diabetes business has, frankly, really struggled against more focused, often more nimble players.
Mm-hmm.
Think Dexcom, Tandem, Insulet.
Yeah, those guys have really pushed ahead in areas like user interface design, haven't they? But getting new tech through regulatory approvals faster.
And building platforms that are more open, supporting better interoperability with other devices. That's huge for users now.
So looking specifically at Medtronic's challenges, the blog post highlighted things like past product delays. That MiniMed 780G holdup in the U.S. was significant.
Very significant. And they've also faced cybersecurity issues. Remember those? Past FDA warnings. That unfortunately impacted their reputation and, user trust.
Definitely. And historically, they've favored closed systems, kind of keeping users locked into the Medtronic ecosystem.
Which is increasingly out of step with what people want.
Right. The analysis notes they've made some attempts to course correct, like partnering with Abbott for a CGM,
The Simplera partnership.
but progress has reportedly been slow,
Mm.
and it still seems kind of tied to their own system rather than being truly open.
So spinning off this business, well, it could potentially allow the new company to make these shifts faster. They'd be free from the inertia, the competing priorities you find inside a massive parent company like Medtronic.
They could just focus entirely on catching up and innovating in the diabetes-specific space.
That's the idea anyway.
And then there's the elephant in the room, or maybe the injection in the room.
Uh-huh.
The explosive growth of incretin-based therapies, particularly GLP-1s like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro.
Right. These drugs have just fundamentally reshaped the picture, especially for people with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah. For many, they significantly reduce or even eliminate the need for insulin, which, I mean, that directly impacts the market for insulin delivery devices, pumps, pens.
Totally. The blog post details the clear impacts on device makers. You see lower insulin usage. That means potentially fewer people needing pumps or even frequent daily monitoring devices over time.
And there's a significant shift in consumer preference, too.
Yeah.
Let's face it, many patients, if given the choice, they prefer the simplicity of a once-weekly injection compared to managing devices, tubing, site changes, all that complexity.
It's understandable.
And this is leading to slowing growth in T2D devices. That previously anticipated big growth spurt from the much larger type 2 diabetes market. Well, it's now under considerable threat as more people switch to these injectables.
And this disruptive force, it connects directly back to Medtronic's decision. The spin-off acknowledges that their business model has to adapt. It must.
So the new entity can maybe position itself better in the future, where insulin devices might serve a more specific niche.
Exactly. Potentially focusing more on integrated data, support tools, that kind of thing, adapting to the new reality.
Okay, so while strategic focus and external disruption are clearly big stories here, the analysis suggests that those missed profit targets within the diabetes division, they were likely a powerful, maybe quieter driver for this spinoff.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Achieving that double-digit revenue growth we mentioned earlier, it required significant investment, high R&D spend to try and keep pace with competitors.
Right.
Substantial regulatory costs, especially dealing with those past issues, and just the sheer inefficiencies of operating within a massive, complex conglomerate structure, it all adds up.
The result, profitability suffered. So the spinoff lets both entities kind of reset. Medtronic improves its overall corporate profitability by removing the lower margin business.
Cleans up their books.
And the new diabetes company gets the chance to restructure its operations and its cost base specifically for its market reality.
Now let's hop across the pond to Switzerland. We see a parallel move, though slightly different, from Ypsomed.
Right. The blog post told us they've also decided to divest their diabetes care division.
And their stated reason is pretty straightforward. Double down on their more profitable delivery systems business. That's where they make the self-injection pens, auto-injectors.
And the financial contrast highlighted in the analysis is, well, it's stark.
Very stark. In the first half of their current fiscal year, their diabetes care revenue, it was growing fast, over 50% year on year, which sounds great.
Sounds amazing.
But it was still operating at a loss. Over 20 million Swiss francs down. Their pump, the MyLife Ypsopump, had about 60,000 users at that point.
Okay, now compare that to their delivery systems division in the same period.
Much higher revenue, strong growth, nearly 25%, and solid profitability. Big difference.
And importantly, Ypsomed has committed, what was it, a massive CHF 1.5 billion over the next 5 years.
Yeah, huge investment.
To expand their injectable delivery systems manufacturing. They're clearly betting their future on that side of the business, no question.
Absolutely. So the lessons from Ypsomed's exit, as interpreted in the blog post, they align in some ways with Medtronic's move, even though the structure is different. Focus wins for Ypsomed. Profitable growth is clearly in injectable delivery systems.
And divestment isn't failure. I mean, even with that growth in diabetes care revenue, the opportunity cost of continuing to invest there was just too high compared to their core strength.
Right. And again, it points to spinouts as accelerators. Recognizing that the diabetes care market is evolving so fast, it's hard to manage effectively as just a secondary product line within a broader company.
It's interesting, there was a user's perspective on this too, mentioned in the comments section of the blog post. An Ypsopump user who initially felt some, worry about Ypsomed selling off the business.
Understandable concern.
But their concern was eased when they learned the buyer, this company TechMed, is actually owned by Willie Michael, who founded Ypsomed's self-care solutions side. So it feels like it's staying somewhat in the family.
Yeah, that connection probably offered some reassurance. And the user also mentioned the importance of retaining the existing user base and highlighted the recent launch of their iOS app as a really key factor.
Especially for users deciding on a new pump, right?
Yeah.
Noting that lack of an app had previously pushed some users toward competitors like Tandem.
Absolutely. But the reply to that user comment added a crucial point. While it's staying in the family, that divested business now has to be self-sustaining.
Ah, right. It can't rely on being subsidized by the profitable parts of Ypsomed anymore. Its success depends entirely on its own performance now. No safety net.
Exactly. Okay, so circling back to Medtronic, let's look closer at why they specifically chose an IPO, rather than just selling the business outright to a private buyer or another company.
The analysis suggests this choice indicates, well, a degree of confidence within Medtronic that the diabetes business actually can succeed as a standalone entity in the long run. They think it has legs.
Yeah, you wouldn't take something public if you thought it was doomed, right?
Right.
And the reasons cited for preferring an IPO, they make sense. It creates a market valuation opportunity. Let the public market decide what it's worth independently.
And it provides direct capital access for the new entity, gives its own pathway to raise funds for R&D for expansion, totally independent of Medtronic's corporate priorities and budget fights.
An IPO also offers strategic agility. Maybe counterintuitively, public companies can sometimes restructure and make big strategic shifts more transparently, maybe even more rapidly, when they're directly accountable to shareholders, focused only on that specific business.
Interesting point. And for Medtronic itself, it offers optionality. They can hang on to an initial stake and potentially phase out their investment over time, depending on how the new company performs.
Right. The analysis drew a parallel here to similar spin-offs we've seen at other large conglomerates like GE carving out GE Healthcare or Siemens with Healthineers. It's a known playbook.
Okay, so pulling all this together then, what might this new model for a diabetes technology company actually look like,
Right.
based on the trajectory these spin-offs seem to suggest?
Well, the blog post paints a picture that shifts away from the traditional medical device manufacturer model
Yeah.
and moves towards something more like a health tech platform company.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means entities that are likely to be lean and digital first, prioritizing user experience, slick mobile apps, cloud data, connectivity, all that stuff.
They'll probably have to embrace open systems, right?
Yeah.
Actively partnering with other companies for interoperability instead of insisting on those closed ecosystems we talked about.
Definitely. And they'll leverage AI-enabled algorithms more and more, trying to provide more personalized, more automated diabetes management, especially in closed-loop systems. Better predictions, better adjustments.
And crucially, they'll need to be GLP-1 compatible.
Mm-hmm.
Positioning their tech, whether it's CGMs or decision support tools, as valuable complements, even for patients whose insulin use is way down or gone because of pharmaceutical therapies.
Find their place in that new ecosystem. So the key takeaway here is that these spin-offs, they aren't really signals of retreat. They're more like strategic reboots, designed to create companies built from the ground up for this evolving market.
Ultimately, it feels like both Medtronic and Ypsomed are responding to a very similar set of powerful forces. You've got the pressure on their profit margins, the seismic shift caused by GLP-1 therapies, and that intense, really innovative, competitive environment.
Yeah, same pressures, slightly different responses based on their overall corporate strategies. An IPO for Medtronic's diabetes unit, a full divestment for Ypsomed's, but the underlying message feels similar.
Which is?
Succeeding in diabetes care moving forward likely requires a new kind of company, different DNA.
So for Medtronic, it's about creating this dedicated entity to maybe preserve growth potential while strengthening their own corporate margins, kind of having their cake and eating it too.
Potentially. And for Ypsomed, it's simpler. Focus entirely on where they see the most profitable, scalable growth potential, which is injectables for them.
And for you, the listener, whether you're a patient using this tech or an investor watching the space, it's a clear signal, isn't it?
It really is. The next chapter of diabetes care technology will likely be written by companies that are leaner, nimbler, more focused, and built specifically for a world that is increasingly influenced by new pharmaceuticals and really demands patient-centered digital health solutions.
Now, the author of the blog post added some interesting reflections after summarizing the core story, sort of thinking out loud.
Yeah.
They felt one point the initial summary might have missed was that this spin-out, it could be part of a longer-term strategy, one that actually began with earlier management changes within Medtronic's diabetes division, not just a sudden reaction.
That makes sense. These big shifts rarely happen overnight in huge companies. They often build over time.
And the author raised some fascinating open questions that this whole move creates. Really good questions.
Like what?
Well, for example, without the safety net of the larger Medtronic umbrella, and with this idea of more focused investment, could this mean the eventual end of Medtronic's own CGM technology, especially given the strong competition from Abbott and Dexcom?
And the fact they're partnering with Abbott now on a CGM, yeah, that's a big question. Why run two horses?
Exactly. And what about their plans for future pumps? The analysis noted they seem to be moving towards a more app-centric control model, which is kind of table stakes now. Will the focused investment cash in the new company be specifically targeted at accelerating that critical shift, getting them to a more modern, consumer-friendly platform faster? The author felt the analysis was right, that the spin-off at least allows this kind of sharp focus.
It removes excuses,
Yeah.
perhaps.
The author also wondered if these moves by both Medtronic and Ypsomed signaled the true emergence of a fundamentally new type of diabetes technology company altogether. Are we seeing a blueprint?
And maybe the flip side of that. Can the freshly spun out Medtronic diabetes entity actually transform into the consumer-focused health tech company it probably needs to be? Or will that traditional Medtronic DNA, that big medical device company culture, prove too ingrained to change quickly enough?
That's a huge question, though the author did point out that the decision to pursue an IPO, at least, suggests Medtronic's management believes the new entity can perform well enough to attract public shareholders. They're putting money on it, in a way.
True. And there was another comment on the blog post that offered a really provocative thought, suggesting that maybe pump and sensor technology is heading towards convergence, towards a single dominant app-driven algorithm controlling various bits of hardware.
Interesting. Like an operating system for diabetes.
Kind of. This commenter believes this could lead to consolidation, maybe a kind of unified device form factor across the market, like a standard patch pump option, a standard cannula option, all powered by the same leading algorithm.
Wow. And they specifically felt Abbott's sensor technology is so far ahead, mentioning their work on ketone glucose CGMs, that market pressures will eventually lead to others converging onto that platform or just falling behind.
With maybe only truly non-invasive CGM offering a fundamentally different competitive threat down the line.
So that raises a massive question, doesn't it? If technology does converge like that, is that ultimately a bad thing? Does it reduce the competition that historically drives innovation?
Or is it just an inevitability, driven by what works best for patients, and competition will simply shift to other areas, data interpretation, support services, integration, or maybe consolidation just happens really slowly over many years?
It's clearly a complex picture. You've got financial realities, intense competitive pressures, and just incredibly fast-moving medical and digital technology all swirling together.
Yeah. And these strategic decisions from Medtronic and Ipsum, they really underscore that traditional medical device companies are actively adapting. They have to. They're restructuring into leaner, more focused businesses to try and cope.
And as we've discussed, this genuinely could be the dawn of a new type of diabetes technology company, one built specifically for this future landscape.
So it leaves us with this final thought for you, the listener. Considering these significant shifts towards more focused companies and this potential for converging technologies we just talked about, how might your own experience using diabetes technology potentially change in the coming years? What might that look like for you day to day?
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.